Welcome my channel. Tonight's story takes us deep into the dust and blood of the Old West, where legends were born from pain and survival. This is the true and chilling tale of Texas, 1873, the enslaved boy who escaped and became the Old West's most feared gunslinger, a story built from court records, frontier newspapers, and eyewitness accounts that history tried to erase. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure you subscribe, because uncovering real historical truth like this takes countless hours of deep research, cross-checking facts, and separating myth from reality. He was born into bondage on a small, isolated ranch in eastern Texas, long before anyone ever whispered his name with fear. No one recorded his birth date. No one marked it in a family Bible. To the people who owned him, he was property before he was a child. His earliest memories were not of lullabies or comfort, but of dust in his mouth, the sting of heat on his skin, and the sound of commands barked at him before sunrise. He learned to work before he learned to read faces, hauling water, tending animals, and watching violence unfold as if it were a normal part of the day. Even as a boy, he understood something most children didn't: that mercy was rare and weakness was dangerous. He watched men older than him collapse in the fields, beaten for slowing down, punished for speaking out of turn, punished even for silence. He saw mothers forced back to work days after giving birth, and children sold away without warning. These moments shaped him quietly, carving something sharp and unbreakable inside him. He learned to keep his eyes low, his mouth shut, and his thoughts hidden. Survival was not about hope, it was about endurance. The ranch sat near a rough trade route, and passing cowhands, soldiers, and drifters came and went. From them, the boy overheard fragments of a larger world, talk of the Civil War ending, of freedom promised and denied, of Texas still lawless and violent. He listened carefully, piecing together what little he could. He learned that guns commanded respect. He learned that men with weapons decided who lived and who died. And he learned that escape, if it ever came, would not be gentle. By the time he reached his early teens, the ranch had grown harsher. The owner, bitter from war losses and fearful of change, ruled with cruelty. Punishments became more severe, unpredictable, and public. One evening, after a long day under the sun, a fellow enslaved man collapsed near the barn. The owner accused him of faking weakness. When the boy stepped forward, just a step, just enough to draw attention, the punishment came fast and brutal. It wasn't meant for him, but it became a lesson he would never forget. Injustice did not require guilt. That night marked the beginning of the end. The boy realized something inside him had crossed a line. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled him. Anger had taken its place, quiet, controlled, patient. He began to plan, not with maps or weapons, but with observation. He memorized routines, watched which doors were locked, learned when the ranch fell into its deepest sleep. He stole moments of rest wherever he could, saving his strength. Every day he stayed alive was preparation for leaving. The moment that forced his escape came without warning. A confrontation broke out near the stables. Raised voices, a threat, a weapon drawn in rage rather than reason. The boy knew instantly what it meant. He didn't hesitate. He ran barefoot into the night, heart pounding so hard he thought it might give him away. Behind him, shouts rang out, then gunfire into the dark, more warning than aim. He didn't look back. He couldn't. For hours, he pushed his body beyond exhaustion, driven by one truth: If he stopped, he would die. He hid in dry creek beds, moved through thorn and brush, let insects crawl over him rather than risk motion. When dawn came, he was miles away, bleeding, dehydrated, and free, at least for the moment. But freedom in Texas in 1873 was not safety. It was a different kind of danger. As the sun rose, the boy understood that escaping slavery was only the first battle. He had no name the world would recognize, no place to belong, no protection from those who hunted runaways for money or sport. The Old West was unforgiving, especially to a black boy alone. Yet something had changed forever. The child who once survived by obedience was gone. In his place stood someone forged by cruelty, sharpened by fear, and ready to become whatever the world forced him to be. That escape was not just a physical act. It was the moment he severed himself from the life that tried to break him. Everything that followed, every reputation whispered in saloons, every fear attached to his name, traced back to that single night. The Gunslinger legend did not begin with a gun in his hand. It began with bare feet on Texas soil, running toward an uncertain future, carrying nothing but rage, memory, and the will to never be owned again. Once he crossed that invisible line between captivity and the open land, the boy vanished in every way that mattered. There were no posters with his name, no official records marking his escape, just rumors passed between ranches and along dusty trails. Texas in the early 1870s was a place where men disappeared easily, swallowed by distance, violence, and lawlessness. For a black boy alone, freedom meant becoming a ghost. He understood that instinctively. He changed how he walked, how he spoke, even how he breathed. Every sound felt like a threat. Every rider on the horizon looked like death closing in. He moved mostly at night, following cattle trails and river lines, avoiding towns unless hunger forced him closer. When daylight came, he hid in mesquite thickets or abandoned sheds, letting the heat bake him into stillness. Hunger was constant, thirst worse. He learned to chew roots, drink muddy water, and endure the ache in his stomach without complaint. Each mile stripped away what little childhood he had left. What replaced it was something colder, awareness. Texas after the Civil War was chaos dressed as opportunity. Former soldiers roamed with weapons and grudges. Bounty hunters hunted anything they could profit from. Freedmen were kidnapped and sold back into forced labor under false charges. The boy learned quickly that no one would protect him. Freedom papers meant nothing if a man with a gun said otherwise. So he avoided questions, avoided names, avoided eye contact. When asked who he was, he said nothing. Silence became armor. It was during this wandering that he became a fugitive not just from slavery, but from the law itself. One night, hiding near a small settlement, he witnessed a robbery gone wrong. Two men argued loudly outside a saloon, one drunk, one desperate. A gun went off. The drunk man fell. The other fled into the dark, straight past where the boy was hiding. By morning, the town needed someone to blame. A black figure had been seen nearby. That was enough. From that moment on, he was hunted not for what he had done, but for what the world assumed he would do. Being chased changes a person. It sharpens instincts, strips away hesitation. He learned how to read tracks, how to double back, how to vanish into terrain that others found hostile. He learned that speed mattered less than patience, that panic killed faster than bullets. With each close call, fear hardened into control. He stopped reacting and started calculating. Eventually, he drifted westward, toward land rough enough to hide him. Small border towns, outlaw camps, and cattle crossings became his shelter. These places didn't ask questions. They only cared whether you pulled your weight. He worked when he could, cleaning stables, guarding horses, hauling freight. Payment was food, sometimes a knife, sometimes information. He listened more than he spoke. He watched how men carried themselves, how they held weapons, how they measured danger. It was here that the boy realized something important. The law feared violence, but respected it too. Men with reputations were left alone. Men without them were used, blamed, or buried. If he wanted to survive, he couldn't remain invisible forever. He needed to be known, but on his own terms. His first real weapon wasn't a gun. It was confidence learned the hard way. When threatened, he didn't flinch. When challenged, he didn't beg. That alone changed how others treated him. In one border camp, a man tried to take his food, assuming the boy would submit. Instead, the boy struck first, fast and brutal, leaving the man bleeding and humiliated. No one intervened. That night, the boy ate in peace. Word spread quietly he wasn't weak. The transition from runaway to outlaw wasn't sudden. It happened in fragments, moments where survival demanded action, where mercy invited death. Each choice pushed him further from the boy he had been and closer to the man he would become. By the time he touched a gun for the first time, he already understood what it meant. A gun wasn't power, it was consequence. He disappeared again after that, moving deeper into Texas, where records were thin and graves were common. Ranchers spoke of a young black drifter who never stayed long. Lawmen mentioned a nameless figure always one step ahead. No one could describe him clearly, only the feeling he left behind: unease, caution, silence. This was the making of the fugitive, not a criminal by choice, but by circumstance. The enslaved boy, who ran barefoot into the night, was gone. In his place stood someone shaped by pursuit, sharpened by danger, and slowly realizing that to survive the Old West, he would have to become something the West itself feared. He met the man by accident, or at least that's how it seemed at the time. The boy was half-starved, hiding near a dry arroyo outside a lawless border town, when he heard a rifle being cocked behind him. He didn't run. Instinct told him running would get him shot. Instead, he turned slowly, hands visible, eyes steady. The man watching him was older, scarred, with a face shaped by years of violence and regret. He didn't look like a lawman or a rancher. He looked like someone who had survived long enough to know better. The man didn't ask for a name. He didn't ask where the boy came from. He simply studied him for a long moment and said, "You don't flinch. That'll keep you alive longer than luck." Then he lowered the rifle. That was the beginning. The man was known by many names, most of them whispered. Some said he was a former Confederate scout. Others claimed he'd once ridden with outlaws before turning on them. What mattered wasn't his past, but what he knew. He understood the West the way predators understand territory, where danger slept, where men lied, where death waited patiently. He offered the boy food, water, and something far more valuable: instruction. Not kindness, survival. He didn't teach with words at first. He watched, he tested. He made the boy sit for hours without moving, ignoring hunger and insects, learning stillness. He sent him into town with no money and told him to come back without being noticed. When the boy failed, the man didn't punish him. He explained exactly why he'd been seen, what movement gave him away, what mistake could have killed him. Every lesson carried the same message. The West does not forgive error. The first time the boy touched a gun, it wasn't dramatic. The man placed it on the ground between them and said, "That won't make you powerful. It'll just make your mistakes final." He taught him respect for the weapon before skill, how to clean it, how to load it slowly, how to never point it unless he meant to end something forever. Only then did he teach him how to shoot. They practiced far from towns, using rocks and broken bottles as targets. The man emphasized control over speed. One shot, one breath, no panic. He taught him how to draw without haste, how to read another man's shoulders, eyes, and stance before a hand ever reached for a holster. "Most men decide to die long before the gun comes out," he said. "They just don't know it yet." But the training wasn't only about killing. It was about knowing when not to. The man drilled into him that unnecessary violence brought attention, and attention brought lawmen, posses, and graves. Fear was a tool, not a habit. Reputation mattered more than body count. "If they think you're dangerous," the man said, "you won't have to prove it often." The boy learned other things too. How to move through towns without leaving memory behind. How to change his appearance with posture and silence. How to read a room the moment he stepped into it. He learned when to sit with his back to the wall, when to leave before trouble arrived, when to stand his ground so no one tried him again. These lessons weren't about dominance. They were about control. At night, by small fires hidden from view, the man sometimes spoke about the past, not details, but warnings. He talked about friends buried in unmarked ground, about mistakes made in anger, about trusting the wrong people. It became clear that the man wasn't training the boy to become a hero or a legend. He was training him to outlive everyone else. The bond between them wasn't sentimental. It was forged in necessity. The man never called the boy son, and the boy never called him sir. Respect flowed through discipline, not affection. Yet, in rare moments, there was something like care, an extra ration saved, a warning given sooner than needed. A hand placed on the boy's shoulder before a dangerous choice. The end came suddenly, as it always did in the West. One morning, they were ambushed while crossing a shallow canyon. Gunfire erupted without warning. The man pushed the boy into cover and returned fire with terrifying calm. When the smoke settled, the attackers were gone, but the man was bleeding badly. He knew immediately it was fatal. He didn't ask for help. He gave instructions. He told the boy where to go, which towns to avoid, which name to never use. He placed the gun in the boy's hands, not as a gift, but as a responsibility. "Everything I taught you," he said, "was so you wouldn't end up like me." Then he smiled faintly and added, "But if you do, make it count." The boy left before dawn, just as he was told. He didn't look back. He didn't bury the body. The West didn't wait for grief. From that moment on, the boy was alone again, but no longer unarmed, untrained, or uncertain. The mentor was gone, but the lessons remained, etched into muscle memory and instinct. The enslaved boy had become something else entirely, not just a survivor, but a force shaped by precision, restraint, and lethal certainty. And soon, the Old West would learn his name, not as a runaway, but as a warning. By the time his name began to circulate, no one knew where he truly came from, only what followed after he passed through. It started quietly, the way most legends do. A gambler in Abilene backed down from a fight after one look at him. A ranch hand in San Angelo warned his friends not to drink too much when that quiet black gunslinger was in town. Fear moved faster than facts, and that worked in his favor. He understood now what his mentor had taught him: reputation was a weapon you didn't have to reload. He never announced himself. He didn't brag, didn't boast, didn't linger. He rode into towns alone, stayed long enough to eat, gather information, and leave. But trouble had a way of finding men like him, especially in a West that thrived on testing strength. Some wanted to prove they were faster. Others wanted to collect a name to add to their own legend. A few simply couldn't stand the idea that someone like him walked unafraid through spaces they believed belonged to them. The first widely whispered incident happened outside a saloon near the Red River. Witnesses later said it was over before anyone understood what had begun. A man reached for his gun, laughing, expecting submission. What he got instead was precision, calm, immediate, final. There was no celebration afterward, no dramatic speech. The gunslinger holstered his weapon, stepped around the fallen man, and left town before sunset. By morning, his name had already traveled 2 counties away. What terrified people wasn't just his speed, it was his restraint. He didn't shoot out of anger. He didn't fire wildly. He didn't chase. Every action seemed measured, intentional, as if he'd already calculated the outcome long before the moment arrived. Lawmen took note. They found no patterns to exploit, no emotional weakness to provoke. He didn't drink himself into mistakes. He didn't attach himself to crews that could betray him. He remained alone, and that made him unpredictable. Stories grew darker with distance. Some claimed he never missed. Others said he could sense violence before it happened, leaving town hours before blood was spilled. Ranchers warned their sons not to challenge quiet men with steady eyes. Saloon owners learned to watch the door when he entered, not because he caused trouble, but because trouble tended to arrive soon after, drawn by the myth surrounding him. His fearsome reputation wasn't built on numbers, but on certainty. Men who confronted him rarely survived to spread their own version of events. Those who did spoke of the same thing: the feeling that once he decided you were a threat, the outcome was already sealed. That psychological edge made him far more dangerous than louder, flashier gunmen. He didn't need to kill often. The possibility alone was enough. Law enforcement found themselves trapped by their own limitations. He crossed county lines freely, operated where jurisdiction blurred, and left little behind but fear and rumor. Without witnesses willing to testify, and with many secretly relieved, he dealt with men they themselves feared. Warrants went unenforced. Some sheriffs quietly admitted they preferred knowing where he was rather than provoking him into open war. Yet beneath the legend was a pattern few noticed. He never harmed the helpless. He never robbed those who couldn't afford to lose. When violence happened, it followed provocation, threat, or betrayal. That distinction mattered to him, even if the world refused to see it. To most, he was simply the most dangerous man in the room, a gunslinger whose presence alone bent the air toward silence. By the end of 1873, his name had crossed into bordering territories. Cowboys spoke it cautiously. Outlaws respected it. Lawmen debated it. And somewhere along the way, the enslaved boy who once ran barefoot into the Texas night vanished completely. Replaced by a figure the Old West had learned to fear, not because he sought blood, but because he understood exactly when to spill it. The end didn't come the way legends usually claim it does. There was no crowded street at high noon, no cheering crowd, no dramatic showdown announced days in advance. It came quietly, the way all real endings do in the Old West, sudden, unforgiving, and final. By 1874, his name carried weight across Texas and beyond. Men lowered their voices when it was mentioned. Lawmen argued over whether chasing him was worth the cost. And he knew something most feared men eventually learn: reputation paints a target you can't outrun forever. The final confrontation began as a trap, though not the kind set with ropes or iron. It was baited with inevitability. A powerful cattle baron, tired of losing hired men who refused to cross paths with the gunslinger, decided fear had gone on long enough. He gathered a group of seasoned gunmen, not brutes, but professionals, men who understood patience and angles. Word was allowed to spread carefully, a payoff waiting in a border town, easy money, minimal risk. It was the kind of rumor that always reached the right ears. When the gunslinger arrived, he felt it immediately. Towns had a way of telling you when they were holding their breath. Doors closed too early. Eyes avoided his. Even the horses were restless. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't run. He rented a room, ate a quiet meal, and waited. That alone unsettled the men watching him. Night fell heavy and still. The confrontation came not in the street, but behind the stable, where lantern light flickered and shadows stretched long. The first shot missed, intentionally, a warning, a chance to surrender or run. He didn't take either. Instead, he spoke calmly, telling them to step away, that no one needed to die. It was the last mercy he ever offered. What followed was fast and brutal. Shots cracked the air, echoing off wood and stone. When it was over, 3 men lay wounded, 1 dead. The gunslinger stood untouched, his breathing steady, his movements controlled. But he knew the truth in that moment. This would never stop. Even if he won every fight, the fights would keep coming. By morning, posses were forming. Lawmen who had once hesitated now had political pressure, money, and pride pushing them forward. He didn't flee in panic. He rode out alone, heading west, toward rough country where names were lost and survival was uncertain. Some said he planned to disappear. Others believed he was heading toward one final stand. Days later, his horse was found near a canyon, reins cut clean. No body was discovered, no weapon recovered. Just blood on stone and tracks that vanished into rocky ground. Theories spread immediately. Some claimed he died from wounds no one saw. Others insisted he staged his death and crossed into Mexico under a new name. A few swore he walked away from the canyon on foot, choosing obscurity over legend. What sealed his myth wasn't how it ended. It was what followed. Violence along his old routes dropped sharply. Men who had once terrorized towns vanished or changed their ways. It was as if the fear he embodied lingered even after he was gone. People still spoke his name as a warning, not a boast. "Don't do it," they'd say. "You'll end up like the ones who crossed him." Records tell us almost nothing beyond that point. No grave, no trial, no confirmed death, just fragments, a sighting in a border town years later, a man matching his description refusing a fight and walking away, a rumor of a quiet ranch hand who never spoke of his past, but carried himself like someone who had survived too much. And maybe that was the final truth of his story. Not that he died in a blaze of glory, but that he chose to erase himself rather than let the world decide who he was. The enslaved boy who escaped had already beaten the odds once. The feared gunslinger had survived longer than most. Perhaps the last victory was denying history a clean ending. In the end, his true identity disappeared with him. No headstone, no real name carved into memory. What remained was the legend, a boy who was owned, who ran, who learned, who became something the Old West couldn't control. And long after the guns fell silent, his story lived on, not as proof of violence, but as a reminder that fear is born when someone refuses to stay broken.